Welcome back to No Limit Drag Racing 2.0, and today I finally have a suspension tuning tutorial for you guys. This is arguably the most important area to get right in this game. It can make a big difference to your times overall. So the way I'm going to lay this video out is, first of all, I'm going to go through the 5 different areas you can adjust on the suspension, and then I'm going to go through how suspension actually works, because that way you'll be able to make much better calculated adjustments in the end. You won't just be guessing about how the suspension's reacting. If you know how it operates, you'll be able to much more easily find the best setup. And then after that, I'm going to go through a base setup for this game that you can apply to pretty much any car to start with, and then some adjustments you can make depending on how the car reacts. But I definitely make sure you watch this first part on how the suspension operates. It's going to make the whole rest of the video a lot easier. So let's get right into this. So first of all, how does the suspension work and what are the 5 areas we can change in this game? So starting off with clearance, this is essentially ride height, you could call it as well. And it's the simplest of the bunch. It's just how high front and rear the wheels are off the ground. So as you can see, higher off the ground, lower, lowest. This is the most simple and easiest to understand. And in general, you're going to want them all the way low. The reason being, that's going to lower your center of gravity and it's going to reduce the tendency for the car to wheelie. Wheeling is the main problem in this game. The cars really want to wheelie when you launch off the line, and if you wheelie too much, you're going to lose lots of time. So you want to lower that center of gravity, stop the car from wheeling as much, so all the way low on the clearance. Now moving on to stiffness, and for this one I'm actually going to include bump and rebound because they all work together in the same kind of system. So on screen we have a typical shock absorber, and as you can see, the red part, that's your spring, and then the part through the middle, that's your damper, and the damper is the bump and rebound adjustment here. So starting off with the spring and the adjustment you can make the springs stiffer or softer. So you can essentially think of this as how much compression you allow in the spring. So as you can see now, the springs are currently all the way soft. That means we're going to allow them to compress quite a lot when you apply force to them. If we were to put them all the way stiff, that's then the opposite. They're not going to compress like practically at all when you apply force. It would be almost like having no spring at all if you have them all the way stiff. So that's the main adjustment for the springs. Now, these 2 GIFs represent why we need the dampers now. So as you can see from the top one, that's what a spring would be like without a damper. As I'm sure you know, springs oscillate if you apply a force to them. So if you had a car with just springs and no dampers, the spring would compress, decompress, compress, decompress, and keep oscillating and bouncing all the way down the drag strip. Now we obviously don't want that because that's going to lead to inconsistent traction. So you're going to get loads of force applied to the rear wheels, then force lifted off, loads of force lifted off. We obviously don't want that. We want a consistent amount of force applied to those rear wheels. So it's a lot easier to stop them from spinning. So that's where the dampers come into play. As you can see on the second diagram, that shows a spring with a damper, so your typical shock absorber suspension setup. And as you can see, what the dampers do is, funnily enough, they dampen the oscillation. They stop the spring from continuously bouncing up and down. They return the spring back to its neutral position. That's what we want because it means the spring is going to compress when you launch. It's not going to bounce. It's going to return to neutral over a bit of time. There's still a bit of oscillation, but nowhere near as much. And then you'll be consistent amount of force applied into the ground. Now, how do the dampers work? They have 2 different adjustments, bump and rebound. So the diagram at the bottom next to the word bump is a good representation of what this does. You can essentially think of it as how fast or slow you allow the suspension to compress. So bump is all about compression. If we have the bump stiffness all the way soft, as we do now, you can think of that as fast. So you're allowing the suspension to compress really quickly when we apply force to the rear wheels, for example. Then the opposite can be said if you move it all the way to stiff, so 7,000 for bump. That's going to be thought of as slow. So if we apply force to the rear wheels, they're going to compress the suspension really slowly. Now moving on to rebound. Rebound is the opposite of bump. So bump is about compressing the suspension. Rebound is about decompressing or rebounding the suspension back to its neutral position. So we have rebound set to 7,000. You can also think of this as slow, like the bump. If rebound's at 7,000, it's going to decompress and re-extend to its neutral position really slowly. And if you go all the way down to soft or 1000 for your rebound, that's the same type of thing as bump as well. This is fast, you can think of it. So when the suspension is being rebounded back to its neutral position, it will rebound really quickly with soft rebound. So that's the general gist of how those three work. So the basic principle to think about is the suspension stiffness is just the amount of compression you allow in the suspension. And the bump and rebound is how quickly or slowly you allow the suspension to extend or compress. And finally, moving on to extension, this is the simplest of the bunch and it doesn't really make any difference to your times in this game. It's kind of just aesthetic. It's simply how far apart your front and rear wheels are. So if I go all the way to the top and front, really far apart, all the way down as close as possible together. The only real thing you'd use this for is maybe with cars with really big rear wheels in this game. They have a tendency to clip through the bodywork and it looks a bit unrealistic. So that's where you can lower the rear extension, bring the wheels in a bit more and stop it clipping through the bodywork. As I said, it doesn't really affect performance, it's all aesthetic. So that's a basic overview of the different adjustments you can make and how the suspension actually operates. Make sure you drop a like if you're finding this helpful so far, and now we'll move on to the base setup. You can apply to essentially any car to start with, and then some fine adjustments you can make depending on how the car is reacting. Now moving on to the base setup, this is essentially a setup you can apply to any car in this game to start with, and you should get pretty decent times. That's obviously provided you've set up the transmission, centre of gravity, wheelie bar, so forth, kind of good to start with. But in general, this suspension setup works on most cars. So we're going to start off with 0.2 and 0.2 on the clearance. That's just keep the centre of gravity as low as possible. Then on to stiffness, I go 60 front and 30 rear. In general, you want stiff front, soft rear. I'm going to go into a bit more detail when I'm fine-tuning after this current bit. But in general, you want stiff front, soft rear. The general region's probably about, for the front, maybe 45 to 70. In the rear, about 35 to 20 tends to work, but I go 60-30. For the bump, I go all the way soft. That's all about that smooth and quick weight transfer to the rear of the car. And rebound, same kind of principle. We go all the way stiff on the rebound because that also helps with that smooth and quick weight transfer to the rear of the car. As I said, I'm going to go into a bit more detail in a minute. And for extension, this is all personal preference, obviously, as I said, just for aesthetics. So I'll just quickly run through them again. 0.2, 0.2 on the clearance, 60-30 on the stiffness, all the way soft on the bump, all the way stiff on the rebound, and then extension is preference. So I'm just going to do a run with that quickly and demonstrate how it's working. Now this won't get anywhere near the best time possible for this car. I do have a 5.6 set up for this thing on the channel if you'd like to watch that afterwards as well. But this should be fairly close, I'd hope. Maybe a mid to high 5.7, I'm hoping. It says I'll run with the base setup, and we're even getting a 5.744 with just the base setup, not even the fine-tune one, so that's pretty good. So what I'm going to do here is just go through the replay and actually tell you what's happening with the car. It's better to visualize all the things we've shown in this video. So first things first, we can see we start off, try and get to where it moves. The rear of the car quickly squats down to the ground, so it gets lowered to the ground. That's because of our soft rear bump stiffness. It's going to allow that really quick weight transfer to the rear. And one thing to look out for here as well is the front wheel moves up with the body of the car. That's generally what we want, because that's going to lead to quick weight transfer to the rear of the car. If you to have, say, the rebound stiffness really soft, then the front wheel would likely be lagging behind the bodywork, if that makes any sense. So the bodywork would move up at the front, the wheel would start to extend out, the suspension would extend out, and then the wheel would move up. We don't generally want that. We want the quickest weight transfer possible to the rear of the car. So we try and stiffen up that front suspension so the wheel moves up with the bodywork. That's all to do with the stiff rebound, the stiff springs, and the bump doesn't come into play yet for the front, really. So I'll just wind forward a bit more. You can see front wheel keeps moving up the front of the bodywork. Rear is squatted down. We'll notice the wheelie bar contacts the ground now. That does result in the rear of the car slightly lifting up. which isn't that desirable obviously, but we need that wheelie bar to stop it wheeling completely out of control. Keep going here. Now we'll focus on when it starts to come back down again. So you can see we're still completely squatted at the rear all the way low down because of that soft rear spring and that soft rear bump stiffness. Now this is where the front bump comes into contention. You can see the front wheel contacts the ground and compresses up into the bodywork nice and quickly. That's because we have that soft front bump, which is what we want. We want it to settle quickly on the ground at the front. And rear still squatted, just what we want, because that rebound is set really stiff, so it's not going to want to extend back out. It's going to be quite slow extending back out. And that's the only thing really left now. Just concentrate on the rear of the car and you'll see it slowly starts to rise back up as the run continues. As the stiff rebound gradually gets that rear wheel back to the neutral position, which I believe is about now. And yet the car's pretty much stabilized by that point. Doesn't really change. Continues to run across the line. So that's the general principle there. So now we'll move on to some fine tuning. Now finally moving on to fine tuning the suspension, and there's two key rules I like to follow here. They both revolve around weight transfer and identifying how much the car is wheeling. So the first rule is going to be for if the front wheel is not lifting off the ground enough, so you're not getting enough weight transfer to the rear of the car. And the second rule is going to be the opposite. If you launch the car and the front wheel lifts off the ground straight away and you instantly hit the wheelie bar on the ground, that means you're getting too much weight transfer to the rear. You're going to lose a lot of time riding the wheelie bar. So those are the two areas to keep a lookout for. So if you're getting the first scenario and the front wheel staying planted on the ground and not lifting up, then you need to do these things. You can start off with the spring stiffness and slightly increase your front spring stiffness. Try the car out, see if that improves it. Come back, you can increase it a bit more. It's all about doing small increments. But I'd focus on increasing the front stiffness for this scenario where the front wheel's not lifting off the ground. And then alternatively, if you've tried that and it's not working, secondly, I'd slightly increase the rear stiffness. And then finally, what you can do is you can slightly increase the front clearance. But as I said, I'd focus on that front stiffness. In general, I wouldn't touch the clearance at least. I'd maybe slightly adjust the rear spring, but just focus on that front spring stiffness. And as for bump and rebound in this scenario, they're already configured to get the front wheel off the ground as best as possible. So we can't actually make any adjustment to improve it in this situation because we've got that soft rear bump and the stiff front rebound. So if you are struggling to get the front wheel off the ground, just focus on stiffening the front suspension. Then the second option, so if you're wheeling too much, you're instantly hitting the wheelie bar. What you can do is go over to stiffness again. And this time you want to do the opposite. So start with front spring stiffness. And this time you want to reduce the front spring stiffness. Try the car out, see if that improves it. If not, try slightly lowering it again. That's the main focus for this suspension really, is just focus on the front stiffness. Then if that's not really working, you can slightly decrease the rear stiffness. Do be warned on the rear stiffness though, if you go too low, it can actually lower your top speed. So you may gain in the launch, but your top speed will be lower, so your run will just cancel out and won't actually be any better. For clearance, we're already at the optimal scenario to try and keep the front wheels on the ground here, so we can't actually change much on the clearance. And then for bump and rebound, this would be a last case scenario. I wouldn't tend to adjust them, but if you are trying to keep that front wheel down, you've tried the other things and it's not working, you can alternatively try slightly stiffening the rear bump or slightly lowering the front rebound, and then obviously more trial and error. It is unfortunately a lot of trial and error with this fine tuning section, but it's got to be done. But in general, I'd keep the bump and the rebound as stock there, and the clearance 2020. That just tend to work best for most cars in this game, so I'd just focus on the stiffness there. So as I said, if you want to get the front wheel off the ground more, stiffen. If you want to keep the front wheel on the ground, and decrease it. If you find you've tried all of this and it's not really making any difference, then it's probably an issue with your center of gravity, wheelie bar, or transmission. So I do have a transmission video tutorial I made, so you can click in the top corner of the video now if you want to have a look at that. And comment below if you'd like to see a wheelie bar and center of gravity one as well. Because obviously if they're set up wrong, none of this suspension setup's really going to matter. The car will be way out of balance anyway. But those are the general rules there, and as I said, unfortunately, a lot of trial and error. So that should be everything for suspension tuning in this game. There was quite a lot to go through, so I'm sure I've definitely missed something, and you probably have some questions. So make sure you comment down below if you do have any questions, and I'll try and get back to all of you. As I said, it is unfortunately a bit of trial and error towards the end, but the main thing I'd say is as long as you understand how the suspension works, then you should be able to apply that knowledge yourself and get the setup better. So I definitely focus on that first part of the video I did, just walking through how suspension actually operates. And that's all from me. Make sure you leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more videos like this. And thanks for watching. And I'll see you next time.